It's easy and natural to define listening as, I hear someone saying something and so I respond. In fact, we might say that this at least fits the least complex definition of communication, of a message passing from a sender to a receiver and a response being sent back to the sender. But in this series of listening videos, we have learned to take apart the act of listening and dissect it into 6 interrelated behaviors that we have identified as the HURIER listening model. We've emphasized the word behavior because listening is something we must purposely perform. In this video, let's turn our attention to the 5th HURIER listening behavior, the process of evaluating. In a nutshell, the process of evaluating refers to critically analyzing the information you are hearing. This means you have taken the time to understand the meaning the other is trying to create, and now it is important to apply critical listening skills to that message. In looking at critical listening, we should look at how critical listeners prepare to listen, how critical listeners evaluate the credibility of the speaker, and how to evaluate the message. First, how do critical listeners prepare to listen? Critical listeners are not negative listeners. They're simply people who are going to really think about the information and examine the message for validity and truth. A critical listener is one who's not afraid to listen. She or he has an open mind in every conversation. We all have attitudes, beliefs, and values. And just because someone is discussing a different viewpoint, we should not immediately go into defense mode and shut down our brain to get ready to argue. Instead, be ready to modify your position. Consider all aspects of what the other person is trying to say, and be interested in hearing how other people might view things. Also, don't be trapped into only seeing extreme positions. There's a lot of gray between black and white. Critical listeners display more concern for relationships than being right. Therefore, they take the time to hear people out. This is the first step to critical listening and evaluating. Second, how do critical listeners evaluate the credibility of the speaker? Several months ago, I purchased a new used car. I can tell you that this car, a 2008 Corvette, has a 6.2-liter engine. But if I were to start telling you very much more about the details of the engine, you should immediately stop listening. Why? Because I don't really know anything about the inner workings of engines. When listening to someone, a critical listener has to listen for credibility clues. What clues is the listener providing that they might be qualified to speak on the subject? Evaluate whether you can trust the knowledge or information, and whether the speaker is sincere and is trying to honestly share accurate information. This is the second step to critical listening and evaluating. Third, how do critical listeners evaluate the message? You should begin evaluating any message by sorting out the facts, opinions, and the inferences. Facts can be verified by evidence. Opinions are not facts. They are conclusions that people believe based on information combined with his or her attitudes, beliefs, and values. Opinions sometimes make a lot of sense, and other times are just the result of a pure emotional reaction. Inferences, unlike facts, are not arrived at because of direct observation. It's a good guess. It might be a probable conclusion based on the information. Sometimes people infer a conclusion based on what they think they know are based on bits of information. A solid way to examine what's being said, after you've sorted out the facts from the opinions and the inferences, is to examine the evidence and reasoning the person is presenting, remembering that claims without evidence to back it up are really opinions. Try to mentally organize the evidence and if the person is making sense logically. If the person is using hasty generalizations, putting things into an either-or framework, or arguing the point by insulting the other position, you know to watch out for the conclusion they are attempting to make. These are all illogical fallacies. Listening to others using these skills does not mean that you accept everything others say. Instead, evaluating helps you to hear all sorts of information you may or may not agree with and be able to better sort through the data. Evaluating or critical listening is not an easy task. Remember that it certainly doesn't mean that you're to be a negative listener or a negative person. In fact, it means the opposite. A critical listener is someone who assumes the best of others and yet is wise enough to know that not everyone will present information logically or sometimes with the best intentions. You should be open to listening, but then listen carefully to measure the credibility of the person who is speaking on the subject. And finally, learn to listen for evidence and the logic the person is using to bolster their position. After you do this, you can then thoughtfully respond. But responding is the subject of another video. See you in the next video.